Nowadays, people are really concerned about government surveillance with drones on US soil, and now that COVID has been a great vehicle from which to promote totalitarian and Orwellian restrictions, these concerns aren't exactly unwarranted. So we get a lot of questions regarding how to evade drones. So in this video, we will cover one of the most important methods for evading aerial surveillance, and this technique is codenamed Popeye. Contrary to popular belief, aerial surveillance platforms, such as drones, cannot magically see through clouds. There are most certainly technologies out there, such as synthetic aperture radar, that can see through all weather conditions, but it's not going to be a technology capable of streaming video as we know it. Most of the time, when we see footage from a drone camera on the internet, we're either looking at electro-optical footage or infrared footage. Electro-optical imagery and footage is by far the most common, and despite its fancy-sounding name, it's basically just a normal video camera, albeit with a really good image sensor and a powerful zoom lens. And infrared footage is mostly what we know as FLIR. FLIR is actually the name of the company that makes most of the sensors for the government, but it's also an acronym for the technology forward-looking infrared, the sensors that detect heat and display this as an image. Now, a lot of aerial surveillance platforms have a lot of cool features, such as fusion technology, that will allow the operator to overlay infrared imagery on top of, say, a night vision image. This is pretty cool, and so much of a force multiplier that it's impossible to truly fathom. But all of this technology has a critical flaw. It cannot see through clouds. Despite all of the trillions of tax dollars spent on drone and sensor technology, there currently is not a way to stream a live video feed through clouds. There are efforts being made in this arena, however, such as the rapidly under development SWIR or shortwave infrared sensors. These sensors can't totally see through a several thousand foot thick cloud layer, but it can certainly see through a lot more moisture in the air than traditional platforms. But these sensors are extremely expensive, require special maintenance, and are generally not fielded just yet on most of the US military surveillance platforms, with the exception of like CIA drones and small fixed-wing birds. So for the most part, clouds are a drone sensor operator's worst nightmare, and even today, weather is the primary factor for the cancellation of the overwhelming majority of military operations worldwide. Most military operations have a certain go-no-go criteria for launching, and one of the most important criteria is whether or not cloud cover will prohibit the sensor operator from seeing the ground. Of course, this varies from agency to agency, but roughly speaking, this criteria is 20% cloud cover. In other words, if the sensor operator cannot clearly see the ground 80% of the time, we reach what's called Popeye, or the point in which a sensor operator can no longer reliably see the ground. Of course, this is simply a code word that can be different in various military units, but most of the time the word Popeye is used because it is a direct tongue-in-cheek reference to Operation Popeye, which was a clandestine and illegal military weather modification program carried out by the US Air Force from 1967 until 1972, with the goal of seeding clouds and creating a harsher monsoon season in Vietnam. And since the US military is pretty big on history and heritage, and also considering that most aerial surveillance operators and doctrine originates from the US Air Force, the term Popeye is largely used to describe the point in time that cloud cover gets too thick to continue the mission. So what does this mean for us? And how can a person take advantage of this in order to avoid aerial surveillance? Well, we can certainly take a page out of our adversaries' books. The Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and countless other groups have been aware of this for decades. And as such, most insurgents in the Middle East tend to conduct operations like moving supplies out in the open when the sky is overcast. The Taliban, for instance, knows very well that US forces will not conduct operations when the skies are overcast, so they tend to breathe easy when the weather is bad. But one must be mindful of the fact that drones can fly below clouds. So for instance, if your drone normally flies at, say, 35,000 feet, and you have a cloud ceiling below it at, say, 25,000 feet, well, the drone operator can simply fly below the clouds and fly at 20,000 feet. Now, this varies widely by the type of drone that's being used, as well as other environmental factors. The high-flying drones like Predators and Global Hawks cannot fly below a certain altitude because their fuel efficiency suffers. Plus, they can be seen with the unaided eye eye at a certain altitude that varies with the environmental conditions. Also, most drones in the world cannot fly in the rain, so if it's raining, a drone obviously cannot fly below the clouds that the rain is falling from. So there are a lot of caveats to this one, and one can see how this gets to be a really complex topic really quickly. But in places like Afghanistan, this is really easy. Insurgents and civilians alike can look at a certain mountaintop that they can see from their village, which they know the altitude of, and they can say, oh, okay, that mountaintop is covered with a cloud layer today, so that means there won't be any drone strikes or US military operations today, so I'm safe. It gets a bit trickier in the US when you don't have a reference for what level the clouds are at, but we will have a separate tutorial on how to determine cloud levels in a separate video. So taking in this fire hose of information, we can develop a good rule of thumb that if a cloud ceiling is at about 10,000 feet, aerial surveillance operations are unlikely. This is because most high-flying drones can't really fly below 10,000 feet for that long, and if they do, they can easily be seen with the naked eye. And drones like the RQ-7 Shadow that really only fly below 10,000 feet, well, those are called the flying lawnmower for a reason. They're really easy to see and hear. We can also keep in the back of our minds that high winds and precipitation in the form of rain is very prohibitive to not just drones, but other aerial platforms as well. There's a reason that we call it Charlie's weather.
This is sure Charlie's weather.
Insurgents have always thrived in poor weather conditions, and while helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft can fly in the rain, it's not ideal. For the fixed-wing assets, rain reduces visibility. For the drones, it causes them to fall out of the sky. And for helicopters, flying in the rain is dangerous. So avoiding aerial surveillance is as simple as realizing the weather conditions that restrict aerial surveillance and taking advantage of those conditions to plan your operations when you know that there won't be an eye in the sky.